Hello everyone, in this short video we're going to review the rendering section of the Apptim report for a test we did on an Android app. So in the summary section we can see that there's a warning. It shows that the max length in the rendering frames was 16 frames, which is a medium warning. We'll soon explain what this means, but we can then go down to scroll down to the resource usage graph, open the rendering section to get more details about this specific metric. So this is a test that I ran for an Android app. I'm going to explain which metrics and the graphs are shown here. So when we see rendering statistics, we typically look at two things. On one hand, we look at frames per second. Usually, drawing in mobile devices happens every 16 milliseconds, depending on the hardware refresh rate. This means that your app should be able to render at 60 frames per second. To achieve this, each update to the screen will need to end in less than 16 milliseconds. Typically, an app with less than 30 frames per second will show a bad UX and users will complain. Mobile games have requirements for 60 or more frames per second, and we should try that the number of frames per second is never less than 15. And of course, this will depend on the type of app. If we are testing a mobile game, we will expect that the frames per second during the test are between 30 and 60. But when we are testing a transactional app, as is the case of the app that I tested, we won't focus much on keeping these levels of frames per second, but we might be more interested in knowing how fast can certain transaction be completed, and we can actually do this by measuring the UX response time using Apptim marks, which is another feature that we have. So in this case, we can see the frames per second graph that our app, at some points we had more than 60 frames per second, at some points during the test we have less than 20. Again, for transactional apps, we might not look at this with more detail. We will care more if we're testing a mobile game or an app that has heavy graphics, animations. If you want, for example, we want to measure, for example, how long does it take for a logging transaction to be completed in our app since the time the user clicks on the login button until the next screen is shown. We will use Apptim marks. We want this time to be the shortest possible. As an industry standard, if the login takes more than 3 seconds, the user will abandon or close the app. So we could use Apptim marks for that. Going back to the rendering, the other aspect that we should look at, which is not only frames per second, is to pay attention to the render lag or junks. So an app can have really good drawing times, but if there is some frame in the middle that gets lost, the human eye can identify it and it creates a bad experience. So that's why we look at the render lag or junks. If a frame took more time than the time that it takes to refresh, which is generally 16 milliseconds, the frame will be skipped and it will be missed the opportunity to be displayed on time. When that happens, we have a junk, as it's this case. This affects the user experience, especially in animations and when user is interacting with the UI via typing or dragging a list view. Then we also have graphs for activity times. Activity is the most important component of an Android app. Understanding and managing the activity lifecycle properly is critical for user experience, as well as measuring the amount of time each activity takes to initialize, inflate, and display it. So here we have the activity times graph, and we can also go to the logs and download the specific activity display time. So we can click here. When we open it, we can see the display time of each activity that was captured by Apptim. This is for our app specifically.